So it's a delight to be here. I was an architecture student once upon a time, but I think I discovered I was a better writer than a designer of buildings, and I ended up migrating into medieval studies and then English, and did quite a bit of grad work in English. And now, after teaching literature and English for many years, now I'm finding myself as a grant facilitator. I mainly work with faculty in arts, and sometimes with faculty members in architecture as well. But once in a while, I also work with graduate students. Today, I just want to go over some of the basics of grant writing. I can't see you here. I think the number one rule for grant writing is to write for your readers. In many ways, grants are all about you, about what you're interested in, what you're going to be working on, and so on and so forth. But you really want to think about who is going to be reading this, who is going to be looking at your grant application and judging it, and finally making decisions about it. Looks like the formatting didn't come through on here, but what you want to do is, first of all, figure out who your readers are. Consider where they're coming from, what's important to them, and what they need to know to give you a good score on your grant application. And you want to design your proposal accordingly. Reader-oriented writing is important for all good writing. You always want to think about your audience and who you're writing for, but I would say that it's particularly important in genres that aim to persuade, and most certainly grant writing is one of those genres. Okay, I've got 3 parts in this presentation, and I've given them the same title, Writing for Your Readers, just because I think it is pretty central. And here are the sections. So I'll begin with Bridging the Gap. You're here in the School of Architecture, interested in a particular project, or thinking about thinking ahead to a project you might do in your graduate studies. Your adjudicators, the committees that will be looking at your grant application, won't necessarily be architects. They might not necessarily know that world. And you'll find that particularly with grad scholarship and fellowship applications, they're in a very different place than you. In fact, they might come from a range of different fields. And what you need to do when you're writing, you got to think about how you're going to bridge that gap between your specialist knowledge and theirs. First, I want to say a couple things about the process, which can help you figure out who you're writing for. And this is the process for adjudication of SHRC and NSERC fellowships. And I understand that for most of you, you'll be applying to SHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, or most probably Ontario Graduate Scholarship, and I have a note about that too. Stage 1, actually there's 3 stages. The first stage is within your unit. Typically you write your proposal, you write your application, and your own department or the School of Architecture faculty members will go through them and rank them. Once that is done, it goes to the second stage, and that's an internal university committee. And universities are given quotas of how many of these SHRC or NSERC grants they can submit to Ottawa. So not all the applications that are written actually end up in the SHRC offices for adjudication. Oftentimes they have to cut maybe 2/3 of the applications that they receive. So this multidisciplinary cross-faculty committee that is making the decision here at the University of Waterloo about whether your SHRC or your NSERC application will go through, this is probably the toughest, the most important phase or hurdle that you need to cross. And as I say here, about 2/3 of them get cut at this stage. And this committee is made up of people coming from across campus, from each faculty. So these are not architects that you're trying to convince. These are people from the Faculty of Arts, people from maybe somewhere else in the Faculty of Engineering, from Environment, and so on. The next stage, for those, the 1/3 or so that end up going on to Ottawa, the success rate is usually higher, and there's still a multidisciplinary committee, but it's a little bit more focused. And I think typically in the last few years, the success rate has been about 60%. And I noted there with the Ontario graduate scholarships, they are entirely adjudicated internally. Okay, so this, I don't know if I tried to use the color schemes for the various faculties here at Waterloo, and I want to make a couple of points with this. This gives you a sense of where people are coming from, those who are applying to SSHRC. So this is a bit of the range of departments and disciplines that are applying for SSHRC grants at the faculty level and among students. And you can see a lot of them are in the Faculty of Arts, within engineering, architecture, and management science. Professors and students apply to SSHRC, and quite a few people also in the Faculty of Environment. And once in a while there will be somebody from math, that's the pink one there, or applied health sciences who will apply for a SSHRC grant. The other thing you need to know is this gives you a sense of who might be on that internal committee looking at your grant. So there's a possibility that you'll have a historian, someone in planning, maybe if you're lucky they'll have an understanding of what happens in architecture, maybe someone from management sciences, plus also representatives from the Faculty of Science and Math and Applied Health Sciences looking at your grant. So you really want to think about translating what you do, what you're going to specialize in, translating that, making it, proposing it in such a way that it can be understood and appreciated by this broader group. And here's something taken from the SSHRC forms, and it lists the adjudication committees. So if yours makes it past that internal UW committee and gets to SSHRC, you choose one of these committees, and I've kind of bold-faced some of them that might be most relevant to you. I guess it depends on the nature of your project. If it's more kind of environment-oriented, archaeology, I think sometimes they classify architecture under there. One thing you should know is that SSHRC is moving towards introducing a category for research creation, and that's particularly exciting for architects because and anyone, maybe in drama and fine arts, wherever you're creating something as part of your research project, your research process, SSHRC calls that research creation. I don't know if they have that yet for these masters, and this is for the doctoral committees and postdoctoral, but it's coming. And as I know, if you're applying for a master's scholarship from SSHRC, you won't actually have these committees. Again, you'll have quite a diverse, one single multidisciplinary committee. Okay, so what does that mean for how you write your grant? Practical implications, language. Wherever possible, avoid very discipline-specific terminology or jargon, if you want to call it that. And when you do need to use specialized terms, which you will sometimes, make sure that you explain it or contextualize it in a way that can be understood. Methods, methodologies. Don't assume that everyone will be familiar with how people in architecture go about doing their research. And don't necessarily assume that everybody from every other discipline, I guess I'm saying, is friendly towards those methodologies. You realize sometimes if you see people from different disciplines that there are some little battles that are waged between, for instance, qualitative research versus quantitative. So, you know, don't assume too much. Tone. Be tactful, be collegial, don't denigrate other disciplines or the methods they use or have used to address your topic area, okay? And I've got an example here. I think I'll just skip over this. This presentation will be available later if you want to take a closer look at some of these pages. Okay, what are they looking for? So now you have a sense of who's going to be looking at your grant. What are they looking for? And you have to ask yourself this. And in general, for SSHRC grants, NSERC, but maybe other kinds of grants as well, they're going to be asking who, what, where, when, why, and how. And more specifically, they're going to want to know who are you as a scholar, as an emerging researcher. What have you accomplished so far? What do your professors think about your work? What drives you to tackle this project that you have in mind, or to pursue this a particular subfield if you're not entirely sure what your project will be? And perhaps why are you well positioned to pursue this particular project? They'll want to know, what is your project? Have you done any preliminary work on that project? And what are your core research questions? What are your aims and objectives for your project, for your time of research in your master's or perhaps PhD studies? When do you expect to complete the project? And that's pretty closely tied to when do you expect to finish your degree? Where does this project fit into the broader scheme of things? How will your research build on or distinguish itself from work that has already been done? And where will you be working on this project, and perhaps what advantages are there to working on the project in the location that you're proposing? And why is this research important? This is an important question. Why is this research important and worth pursuing? And funding, I guess they'll be asking themselves. Why and how will your findings matter, and to whom? And finally, again, my apologies, the formatting went strange here. How, in detail, or as much detail as you can muster, how will you accomplish the project goals? How will you communicate your findings? To whom and with what impact? And increasingly, granting agencies are wanting you to demonstrate that the topic you're pursuing is not only just of interest to you, but is important in some way, that will benefit some group, will advance the research in important ways, and so on. So you really have to think about that. With graduate fellowships, typically there's a lot of focus on the student's record of achievement, your transcripts, and your potential for excellent scholarship in the future, and typically the letters that you request from your professors will cover that. So really, at the time of grant writing, you don't have a lot of control over those things, except maybe the letter writing, and I'll say a bit more. But where you do have control, where you do have an opportunity to make a difference in the competition, is in the project description. And you'll see here that depending on the grant, whether it's a SSHRC or an NSERC or an OGS, they have different ways of identifying what that project description is, and different lengths. For SSHRC, you get 2 pages. For NSERC, you get 1. For OGS, you get so many characters, which is about 1 page. But this is the place where you can shine, I guess we say. All right, quick glance at, these are all the things you have to put together if you're going to apply for a SSHRC doctoral fellowship, very similar for a master's scholarship. If you're applying for an NSERC, it also has a bunch of things you have to do, and what they call the outline of proposed research. That's the 1-pager where you explain what you're going to do. And then what you want to do is look very carefully, whether it's a SSHRC or some other grant, at the instructions that they give you for that project description. And this is what you have for the SSHRC doctoral fellowship. So they're giving you some very specific things that they want to see, and I've underlined some of them. They want the research question, context, objectives, methodology, and contribution to the advancement of knowledge. And they're saying, including for example, but if it says that, I would do it, okay? All right, so the problem is, or the challenge, I guess, is how to fit it all in. How are you going to construct, how are you going to design this two-pager where you propose your project in an effective way and in a way that will be familiar to your adjudicators. So what I'm suggesting here, what I'm going to give you is a template for this. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't need to be rigid. Maybe you'd need to adjust it depending on your stage of research, how much you know about the project you're going to propose. But this is the general format that faculty members will use when they apply for grants. So it'll be familiar to your committees, and it covers all the bases. And this is what it might look like. Sometimes it's easier to visualize. You have 2 pages. Some sections are going to be longer than others, and I'm just going to say a few words about each of these sections. Introduction, first paragraph. I suggest that even if the form doesn't ask for it, that you include a title, something that will be memorable to your readers. You could follow this with a pithy 1 or 2 sentence summary of your proposed research project or topic or core research question. And then they've asked you for some kind of routine information about what your stage is, who your supervisor is or will be, if you know that. You could include that there too. All right. This is the second section, and this is a very important one, and I'm calling it context. This is where you position your proposed research amid work that has already been done. It's kind of the what's typically called the lit review. So you'll want to say, okay, you want to work on this, but you need to set up an argument, something that demonstrates that you understand the field that you're going to be working within. There's strategies for positioning your research. You can say you'll be building on work done by A and B, or you'll be bridging a gap between the theories of A and B, maybe bringing A to bear on B, developing a counter-argument to A and B based on evidence from C. You can see it can get quite complex, and so on. This is where you're demonstrating that you have a grasp of the field that you're entering into, that you've done your homework. And it's also a place to show and demonstrate to them that you can write like a scholar. And what you want to do here is tell a story of research discovery and at the same time load it up with references, because all of these grant applications have a section for references. And this is where the lit review is. You want to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, where you're going. You want to make sure that you don't leave out any critical works or landmark studies in your area. And you want to make sure that no one has already done the project before. Next section, objectives. This can be pretty short. It's often a nice culmination of the context section, the lit review, and here's where you summarize in very succinct fashion what you aim to achieve by the end of your thesis research. And sometimes people even use point form lists. You want to make it very clear. So I've explained to you where the field, where this project fits in, and so here we are. This is what I'm going to do, A, B, and C. I'm going to study the A, B, and C effects of this on that. What you don't want to do is be vague and wishy-washy, make it sound like what they sometimes call a fishing expedition. I've got a good hunch, trust me, I'm going to do a lot of reading, find out about stuff, and see what's there. You have to have a better idea of where your destination is. Methodology and timelines. The committee wants to know that you really have a good idea of how you're going to proceed within the time constraints. So this is the practical section. What are the stages of your research? What will you exactly be doing? Will you be conducting surveys, interviews? Will you be doing some experiments? Will you be working with human participants? People in psychology would do a lot of that kind of thing. You want to give a sense of your time frames. If you have a theoretical framework, you could talk about that. So you really want to establish here the feasibility of your project, okay? That the scope is appropriate, that it's doable, and that it's something that can be done at somewhat at your stage and within the time constraints. So basically, this is where you show that you've thought pragmatically, that you've thought it through. Anticipated contribution, okay. Here's where you sum it all up and basically say, this is why it's important. I'm not just doing something that's interesting, but I'm doing something important, and this is why. And a little bit of NSERC, their instructions. If you have one page, maybe this is what it would look like. Okay, third section, it's a human process. Adjudication committee members take their responsibilities seriously. They will do their very best to be thorough, fair, and judicious as they come to their decisions, but in the end, it's still very much a human process, and it's good to keep this in mind. Committee members are people like you. They have their personality quirks, their scholarly preferences, and their disciplinary allegiances. And a little cup of coffee, sometimes they get cranky when the coffee runs out. They will be fair, but still, you want to think about their experience of reading. You want to avoid annoyance triggers and do everything you can to make sure that their experience of your grant is as pleasant and engaging as possible. And some of these adjudicators, probably most of them, will have a lot of grants to look through. So they don't want to waste their time. They want you to give them the goods, I guess. They might have 100 that they have to run through, so you don't want to be the one that annoys them. So, keep your tone collegial and polite. Don't be arrogant. Don't stir up arguments. Don't say disparaging things about particular researchers or disciplines, because you never know who's going to be on the committee. You also don't want to be too timid and tentative, right? Qualify your statements when appropriate, but don't overdo it. Know what they're looking for, and you've read the instructions carefully, the criteria for adjudication, and you want to make it easy for them to find it. Consider using subtitles, boldface, draw keywords from the instructions so they'll be sure not to miss anything important. Make sure that they don't have to reread sections to find out what you really mean, because when they've only got one day and 100 grants to look through, chances are they're not going to go back and reread it. So don't be too subtle. And a really good tip when you're preparing this is to get someone else to read your application and ask them if there's any time when they're reading through that they stumble, that they scratch their head and find themselves having to go back to get what you meant. Then ask them to flag that, and then you should go back and revise those sections, because obviously something has impeded their progress. Follow the rules. Give them no reason to disqualify you or cut you off. I think, even excellent applications won't necessarily make it through the gate. So it'll sometimes be some minor thing that might put yours out of the running. So you want to pay attention to those details. The last page was proofread carefully, and this make their reading experience as pleasant as possible visually. Don't irritate them with typos and so on, with grammar errors. And I think this is probably a really important point. Tell them a compelling story, okay? You want yours to stand out. Capture their interest, generate some excitement about your research and what you might discover. Emphasize the urgency of the problem, the originality or timeliness of your response, and the significance and potential impact of your findings. If possible, frame it as a research puzzle or conundrum. I mean, what you want to do is evoke in them the same sense of curiosity and excitement that you're feeling about what you're going to do and what you're going to uncover in your research. A few tips on asking for letters. We'll glance at that. It's running short of time. And a few more bits of advice. Proofread, start early, read the instructions, the usual stuff, but you don't want to skip those steps. And finally, don't be too anxious. I mean, you don't have to have a crystal ball, shirk or answer. They're not going to hold you accountable if 2 years down the road you don't end up doing exactly what you proposed, okay? There's flexibility, so do the best with what you know now, with what you think you're going to do, with a project that you can make the most compelling pitch for, and go ahead with that in full confidence. Good luck.